Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Hospitality MD podcast. I'm Kyle Allison, and it's great to see everybody again. It's been a little while since we've done a classic one-on-one interview on the show, and as we come up on season 2 of the PM shift, it's certainly nice to see everybody again. So thank you so much for tuning in and listening. Today, it is truly an honor and a privilege to have Laura Lee Blake, the President and CEO of the Asian American Hotel Owners Association, on the show, otherwise known as AAHOA for short, which is how we'll be describing the organization throughout the series of this conversation. So, Laura Lee, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. And it is absolutely my pleasure to be here today and to be able to speak with you. So thank you for the invite.
Awesome. Do you go on a lot of podcasts or make appearances on other shows? Just curious.
I have not done many of them at all. So
I've had good
the opportunity to do one or two over the last approximately 11 months since I've been in this position. But it's always a new joy, a new adventure to do this. So thank you.
Oh, well, good. Well, yeah, I'm glad that we're able to have you on and maybe even stepping outside of your comfort zone, coming onto a show as you're now new into this role. So thank you. How's everything going, by the way? I mean, you're almost a year in.
Yes.
But not just, this is not your first time with the organization, right? So you've been with AAHOA before and now you're back again. And how has that experience been for you?
Yeah, so well, when I had the opportunity to rejoin AAHOA, as you mentioned, I worked with them for nearly 10 years, back in 2005 to 2014. And during the time, of course, it was an experience unlike any other. As we often say, there is no place like AAHOA. With everything that happens and all the initiatives that we are undertaking. So to then be offered an opportunity to come back as president and CEO was such an honor. And I continue to this day. I sometimes just have to stop and say, here I am, president and CEO of AAHOA, which has nearly 20,000 members, owning more than 60% of all hotels across the United States. It's an incredible association, one that has so much potential, so much strength. And so to be able to step back into this role has just been quite a joy. But I should also mention, too, that, of course, there's changes. I mean, over the years since I left, AAHOA has gotten much bigger. And the interesting fact, too, is when I first was working with AAHOA, I was often working with first-generation immigrants from India.
Right.
And they were stepping in, they were starting their hotels, they were, truly expanding it to become a family business. And now in this role, I'm often working with their children, with the second generation, sometimes even the third generation. And a lot of our leaders now, they grew up in the hotels, they were educated in our finest universities. And so their focus is maybe a bit different. Instead of kind of starting that first hotel or expanding to a second one, they're looking at combining, efforts and assets with other friends and colleagues to really expand portfolios. So they are at a whole different level of hotel ownership than the first time I was here. So that's exciting to see as well, that they have continued to grow, continue to expand, and now the influence that they're having at all levels. So it's been quite a journey, but I'm so pleased to be back.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. I attended my first AAHOA convention last year in Baltimore, and I found a similar mixture of people, and it was a pleasure for me to be around. You walk up to somebody and you strike up a conversation, and you just find out that this guy who just minding his own business owns 40 or 50 hotels.
Right.
And a lot of the leadership now looking at, the officers in AAHOA are some young guys
Right,
coming up, and some young women as well who are a part of it. And it's truly inspiring to see how, first of all, somebody who grew up living in, a family run business still wants to be in the business, right? After all that.
right.
Um, and then the fact that they did take that and they went on and got a formal education,
Right.
and then are using that business acumen that they developed, along with their grit from coming up in the business, to just do monumental, groundbreaking things. So I echo your sentiments, as I think it's great. As somebody who was just an outsider last year at a part of the conference,
Right.
it's truly a pleasure to be around. Actually, on my first day, I walk in for breakfast and there's somebody playing like a wooden flute during the breakfast. I'm like, this is where I want to be. This is awesome.
I,
And I love going in and seeing everyone with their families, together. It's not just me. I own the hotel. It's my family and I are here together.
well,
Um,
and it truly is a testament to the pursuit of the American dream on every level. I mean, everything from the first generation and hearing stories of them coming to the US with pennies in their pocket, combining with family members or friends to buy that first independent hotel, roadside hotel, and then now to see, their children, as you said, continuing to pursue this business and being wildly successful by every stretch of the imagination. What a testament to the American dream, and then to be part of it and to see it and experience it on a day-to-day basis is really quite remarkable. And even I'll share one other quick little story, but in the 11 months since I've been here, we've had two fly-in or lobbying days to Washington, D.C. And we've had an opportunity to meet in person with more than 20 US senators. I believe the count of the members of Congress, the representatives, is well over 150 that our group has met with in person. And to hear, how they feel the same way about AAHOA, where they so respect the hoteliers, they respect the fact that they have such a strong work ethic and they have strong family values, and they're remarkable, shrewd, smart, savvy business people. They open the doors to meet with us. So even that is, again, just such a testament to the association and our members and the influence that they have, because of their pursuit of this American dream, and then seeing it all continue to come together.
oh yeah, absolutely. And with that being said, I'm curious, and this is seriously with all due respect, but has anyone ever said, shouldn't the president and CEO be Asian American? Due to I'm sure I can't be the first one who's brought that up, right? Um,
Yeah. And I love that question, because when I worked with AAHOA before, our president and CEO at the time was Fred Schwartz. And Fred has been and was such a mentor to me. But, we had those discussions. And my understanding is that the membership is smart enough that they want to be able to, especially when we go to DC or meet with elected officials, they want to be able to show that they do have a diversity,
right.
uh, that they understand kind of the importance of being in this country. And sometimes, especially AAHOA was founded on the basis of facing discrimination by banks, by insurance companies. They saw these Indian hoteliers. 95% of them with the last name Patel thought that they were not to be trusted. And so, in forming, the association known as AAHOA, they wanted to also bring in other faces, other diverse people and backgrounds, to show that they work together, they understand that. And so I think that is one of the key reasons that, for example, a large majority of our team here in the Atlanta headquarters and in the DC office We are not Asian. We have a few of them, but we are not Asian. And just how well we work together and how well we enjoy working with our members. It's kind of like a little, maybe even a little UN, right here
Yeah.
at AAHOA.
Yeah, I like that. And I figured you would, say something like that because I had the same experience going to AAHOA as an attendee, as a non-Asian or non-hotel owner. So I went in there and I went by myself and I just was striking up conversations with everybody I could. And you know, one of the things that, somebody asked me, "Are you a member?" And I said, "Of course not. Like, I'm not Asian American and I'm not a hotel owner. How could I possibly be a member?" He's like, that's we don't put there's no vetting of who becomes a member here. It's in show of support of the cause rather than if you fit the profile of the name of the organization.
Yeah.
And I feel like after he said that, I was like, oh, I probably should have realized that, but I genuinely was ignorant. I had no idea that
Right.
you could join as a non-member. And that's actually one big reason why I wanted to start doing more with AAHOA on Hospitality MD in general, because a lot of our viewers are most of our viewers are younger age, up and coming hotel operations, hotel sales, working in the ranks of hotels. Maybe they're in college learning, hospitality. And the majority of our viewers are not Asian American either. So I wanted them to know about AAHOA, know what it is, know the significance of it, because we don't have a hotel industry if it's not for the AAHOA members in the United States. And being me growing up in the Chicago market, in big box real estate assets and all these things, it's like I had to put into perspective, like, this is not representative of the hotel industry in the United States of America, where it's, REIT owned properties and institutional owners. That's not representative of the business. Our business is representative of small hotels and motels with single owners and family owners, and statistically Asian Americans. So that's one huge reason why I wanted to bring you on, so people knew what AAHOA was, and our audience particularly, and that to see what the benefit for them even would be. Like, AAHOA members get discounts on certain things that you could bring back to your hotel, even if you don't necessarily own it. And just being a part of the conversation, the newsletters, the regional shows that occur with AAHOA, not even just the big conference annually. So I guess let me just, before we get into the 12 points, because I want to talk about that with you, just give me your elevator pitch to a non-Asian, non-hotel owner person as to why they would want to get involved with AAHOA.
Right. Well, and you raised some very good points, and I'll share just a few little comments. One is, just as an example, we've recently hired some new team members here. And so I will typically send a note to the board of directors, which we have a large board of directors here at AAHOA. We have more than 30 members on our board. And I will typically send them a note just so that they're aware that we have a new team member. And the typical response is, welcome to the family. Welcome to the family. So excited to have you on board. And that is what we have all experienced, is when you join AAHOA, when you get involved with AAHOA, it truly is like being part of a bigger family. And I can't even tell you how many times I have been invited, for example, in New Jersey, to somebody's big cookout. And I will go, and there will be 50 to 100 members, neighbors, all in somebody's yard, and they're doing a big cookout, and everybody is so welcoming, and they're excited to share their food, make sure that you're being well fed. And so it's truly like being part of a big family. But the other thing that I'll mention too is, and I think this is important, as kind of background. So just this past year, we launched a new women's initiative. and we called it Her Ownership. Now, there's a lot of wonderful women's initiatives in the hospitality industry, and a lot of them, of course, are focused on women's empowerment, women having a voice in the industry. But the AAHOA one is a bit unique to the extent that it's really focused on women who have an interest in owning hotels. So it's the ownership aspect. And so we initially thought last year with our brand new conference that maybe we'd have 50 women. And in the end, we had close to 300. And we had women coming in from India, we had a woman from Canada, women from all over the country. And I'll share with you too that it was interesting because it was in October that this event occurred in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is not really, a prime destination spot at that time. But what we also realized were all the women that came that are not Asian, and they were very interested, and maybe they were there for a variety of different reasons. Maybe even they were connected to AAHOA in different ways. Maybe they were part of different vendors and industry partners that support our members. But suddenly they wanted to be there because they wanted to find out, how do I get into the business? How do I own a hotel? And so I did see a vision that her ownership could really be a way even to overcome maybe this perceived barrier that AAHOA is for Asian Americans and no one else. And so to your point, AAHOA is for everyone. AAHOA is for anyone that has an interest either in owning their first hotel or who has been established in the business for a long time. And it really is because we are unique to the extent that we serve as the voice of the hotel owners. Now, there are other groups out there, and I'll mention, for example, AHLA, the American Hotel and Lodging Association. I mean, clearly they have a very strong presence in the industry, but they represent not only the hotel owners, but other voices as well. The voices maybe of the franchisors,
Right.
of the management companies,
Right.
of the state associations. So they represent a variety of important voices, each one, which we absolutely recognize is necessary in the industry. But AAHOA is really the voice of the hotel owners. That is who our members are. And by joining AAHOA, you get to be part of that. Some of the feedback that we get from our members, some of the most valuable input that they receive is to go to these events. I mean, everything from the AAHOA-Con, the big convention, we host regional meetings, we host town hall meetings, we host golf tournaments. But what our members say repeatedly is it's really the networking. If suddenly they have a problem in their hotel, they can talk to maybe the golf buddies at the golf tournament and say, hey, this is what we've encountered. Have you experienced this before? And they might say, absolutely, yes, you should do XYZ, or you should call this person. They can really help you with that issue. So it's help for any issues that arise. As you mentioned, we have an amazing group of industry partners and vendors that offer, deep discounts to our members. They form relationships with the members. So that is a clear benefit. We are also kind of reamping after COVID our educational experiences. We're going to be putting on more and more webinars. This AAHOA convention coming up, as you mentioned, we will have numerous education sessions there. And we also, even things that are becoming such a concern in the hotel industry right now are the human trafficking issues, that more and more lawsuits are now being filed against hoteliers for human trafficking violations, with allegations that the hotel owners should have known that a particular guest in the hotel was trafficking a victim. And so even providing training and tools and resources, number one, to spot it, and number two, to stop it, and then number three, that if you're being wrongly accused, how best do you address that? So there's so many resources that we offer, and it really is because we are answering to our members. And so the members are getting, what they're demanding or what they need, as opposed to, just kind of a few voices at the top, distributing things. So it's
Right.
an organization for hotel owners across the board.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point about, like, the American Hotel and Lodging Association, how, like, just the net is so wide of representation that they provide. And with that being said, wide is typically more vague, whereas when you're narrow and focused, you can be very, very specific. So much to the point where, to segue into our topic of conversation, AAHOA has developed on behalf of the owners the 12 points of fair franchising, which seems to be just the wave right now with AAHOA, like the big thing. I keep hearing about it. I see it on my LinkedIn. I'm seeing it everywhere. And I remember at the conference last year, they were on like pop-up banners all over the convention center. And it was more of an awareness of it. But this year, it's like in your face, like we're talking about it. It's here, it's here. But upon doing some research, I found that you were the vice president of fair franchising and also the general counsel back when you were there in 2005, meaning that this has been around for quite some time. And then upon further research, I found out that it was developed in 1998.
Right.
And maybe I'm living under a rock or whatever, but now it feels like to me it's being pushed harder now than ever before. Would you say that's correct?
And I would, and I can give you just some historical background. So it's interesting. It was developed in 1998 by a couple of our very strong AAHOA leaders at the time. And the reason was because they were coming from India. Some of them, English, of course, was a second language. Maybe they weren't even very comfortable with the English language. They were being presented with franchise agreements by these very well-known franchisors. And I sensed, especially in talking with some of them, that, it was a great name of a company. And so they would often, unfortunately, sign on the dotted line without even reading what was in the agreement. And of course, nowadays we are strongly encouraging everybody, hire attorneys, make sure you're reading this,
Right.
make sure you know what you're signing. But that was kind of the impetus for the 12 points of fair franchising, where they were seeing problems, they were seeing unfair practices, and it was really an educational tool for our members to say, before you sign anything, start asking some questions or make sure these are just 12 points that you can use to figure out what you're signing so you're not surprised. Now, maybe you don't even like what it says, but at least you won't be surprised after you sign, and then
Right.
especially if you encounter a problem. But back in the day, it was actually 12 bullet points. That's all it was 12 bullet points. And hence the word 12 points. Well, when I started in 2005, as you mentioned, one of my titles at the time, we had a very small staff. I think we had all of 10 of us working. Of course, AAHOA was smaller, but we had 10 of us. And one of my titles was Vice President of Fair Franchising. And I'm a lawyer by training and profession. And so they asked me to kind of do some research on this and to flesh out the 12 points. And so I made an effort to do that with our leaders. We had a franchise advisory committee. And so we looked at these 12 points and we kind of fleshed them out. Now, last year, before I joined, I was brought on as President CEO right after the Baltimore Convention. So last year, the committee had gone through it. They had updated provisions of the 12 points. They wanted to make sure that it was renewed. And so then it was, launched last year as kind of the revised and updated 12 points of fair franchising. That's why you saw the banners at the convention.
Right.
And in many ways, the reason that I was brought to AAHOA was to again pursue fair franchising. They knew what I had worked on in the past, and they wanted to again start focusing on this. And a lot of that was because of the members coming out of COVID, where they had some of them, an entire 12 or 18 months being shut down. And then to come out of COVID and see some of the terms of the franchisors or the brands, what they were being, what was being imposed. And they wanted to renew this effort to bring fairness into the industry. So that's kind of the whole history of the 12 points of fair franchising. And that's why too, we're, really focusing on it again as an educational tool for our members.
I think it's great, and I find it fascinating that like it almost feels like from 1998 to 2005, it was just these 12 bullet points, right, that people were kind of using, and then you really were kind of like the incubator for the development of these points, and now again coming back to like push it into everybody's face and make it the big splash, which is awesome. Like, what an energizing project to be working on.
Yes. Well, it's been exciting. And as you said, it's really, and we keep focusing on this. It really is an educational tool. And I don't think a lot of people understand that. They think somehow we are using it for other reasons, and we're not.
What other reasons have people identified that you don't find to be accurate?
Well, I mean, and I will just use the example that somehow we are advocating that we will not work with franchisors unless they've adopted all 12 points.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
It's not an ultimatum. It's just an educational platform.
exactly.
Got
Exactly.
it.
And, and we're trying to highlight the franchisors or the brands who are incorporating these provisions. Some, thankfully, have incorporated most of them, which is really, to their credit. It's an effort to be fair to the members. And so we appreciate that. So we've done a lot to highlight that. Others, not so much. So,
Which brands who's adopted it most openly, would you say, that you're
right.
highlighting?
Yes, and so there's three that have done a very good job on at least adopting or implementing the vast majority of the ones, especially the key ones. But the first one I'll mention is Best Western. Now, technically, and for those of your audience that are unaware of this, Best Western is a little bit different as a brand. Best Western is actually a membership organization. In other words, the members themselves, they own kind of shares in the company, for lack of a better description, but they also make the decisions. So if a hotel owner is being terminated, it's not because the corporate, the corporate strong men or women are making that determination. It's the member association itself. So it's being run by the members as an association, and they have adopted virtually all of the 12 points. There's a few that don't really apply because they're a membership association instead of a true franchisor. But they have adopted everything that we have encouraged them to do, including things, and I'll just highlight this. Coming out of COVID, Best Western returned tens of millions of dollars to its members coming out of COVID over the last 2 years because they had an excess of funds and did not want to hold on to those. They wanted to treat their members fairly. Now, we have never heard of that before.
Unreal.
Right, exactly. So, that was really what caught our attention. And even to the extent we put and featured Best Western and their board and their president and CEO on the cover of our AAHOA magazine because we were so encouraged with the efforts that they were making, understanding the struggles that the hotel owners were facing coming out of COVID and wanting to give and return money to them that otherwise, they could have held on to. So,
And I just want to understand, not just for me, but also for the audience. So, Best Western, do its members collectively own all of the real estate assets, or is it still individual owner operators that report to a membership rather than a corporate office and a branding organization? How does that work on the real estate side?
yeah. So on the real estate side, and this is for the most part across the board, and it's especially true for all of our AAHOA members, but hotel owners are a bit different than even restaurant owners or maybe other franchise owners. For hotel owners, they own the land and they own the building. So they own the real estate. And then they will partner either, using Best Western as an example, they will partner with Best Western to then fly their or brand their hotel that way or fly their flag is sometimes how we like to call it. And they will sign, usually with most franchisors or brands, they'll sign long-term franchise agreements, but they still own the land and they own the building. So it's a little different with a lot of restaurants. They might lease the building
Right.
to operate the restaurant. So, but our members own the land and the building.
Yeah, and I think that, that's a great clarification for the audience who may be unaware. So thank you for that. So the 12 points of fair franchising, when I read through them, like there's a lot of this stuff is just like, it's almost common sense. Like if you're owning a business, these are the freedoms that you would want to have as a business owner. For example, like the transferability piece, point number 11, like, when it comes to transferability, parties should not delay or act unreasonably because you own the real estate asset and the land. So if you want to sell it, don't delay. However, we can also look at this from the brand point of view and say, well, you know what? I want to vet who my franchise is going through, and I'm not going to let anybody own, but particularly own and operate, is probably the main point of contention for the franchisor. This real estate asset that is flying my flag. So I think maybe if you wouldn't mind just maybe explaining that relationship, because there really are conflicting interests at play with the owners and the brands that just naturally exist, especially when like taking Best Western out of the equation and talking about like the shareholder value type brands that are publicly traded companies that are asset light.
Right.
So it's just this dichotomy that naturally exists. So maybe you could just help people understand that a little bit and how that relates to the 12 points.
Yeah, so, and you raise a very good point. And point number 11 with transferability, that's actually, interestingly enough, one area that we stress a lot with our educational programs because many of the brands will negotiate that with the to be hotel owners up front. I mean, most of these terms in your franchise agreement, a lot of them they will not negotiate. It's kind of a take it or leave it in their contracts. But the transferability, they often will negotiate that. And the reason that becomes important is because, as you said, if you own the land, you own the real estate, the building, and then you have a certain brand on your hotel, and now suddenly, for whatever reason, you want to transfer it. Now, it's interesting in the AAHOA community, especially, sometimes it's just a transfer from the father or the parents to a child. And so, our point under transferability for that is if the brand can vet and assure that this child, and I say child, but usually, of course, they're young adults, if not, and they're even 30s, 40s, 50s at that point. But if the transfer is to a family member who clearly has been in the business, grew up in the business, has
They
been
only grew up in the hotel that you're trying to sell it to them.
right, exactly. So, and that should not require, because sometimes these transfer fees can be, 50,000 or more. And when it's to a family member who has been working in the business for decades, our recommendation is then it should just be an administrative expense. It should be $1,500 so you can look through
Right.
the paperwork, make sure it's fine. And then if it's truly to an outside third party, and if it's a situation where clearly they have, it could even be another AAHOA member that they've worked with, or somebody that's been in the business for 20, 30 years, they have multi-units, multi-hotels. Should it really take that long to vet them as being a
Right.
potential new owner? So, all of these factors come into play. But in the end, it's this idea that, don't prolong this, don't delay making decisions, be reasonable in evaluating it. And of course, if it's brand new and somebody that's never been in the business before, then that clearly warrants additional vetting or additional time. But in a lot of
Define reasonability, if you don't mind. I'm just curious, like, what have AAHOA members been experiencing on this front in terms of time, and what do you consider to be reasonable? Or I should say, what does AAHOA consider to be reasonable?
right. Well, and that's always the loaded question, isn't it? So again, it depends on the circumstances. If it's simply transferring it from the names of the parents to the names of the children who have been in the business and maybe have been part owners, I mean, that should not take longer than 30 to 60
Yeah.
days, right? That's reasonable. If it's transferring it to another hotel owner that is clearly experienced, might even have been operating other hotels with that same brand name, again, as long as you can make sure the financing is in place, everything is lined up, that shouldn't take more than a couple months. Now, if it's a brand new person, maybe it takes 4 months, maybe 5 months, to at least work through those issues. But if it's dragging on beyond that, and they're coming up with new conditions that
Right.
that are not applicable, then that's where it's a concern.
Right. And certainly, like, you know, both parties know, and particularly the brand knows, that their name on the building significantly impacts the value of their real estate asset, which is whenever I read through all these, I just think, well, that's like their never ending bargaining power, is like, okay, well, take it or leave it, just take the brand off and see how much that asset is worth now.
Right.
Or try going to another brand and see how you like it. Uh, so I so I think that again is part of that dichotomy of interest, and them kind of knowing on one hand that, yeah, my brand is one of the biggest elements of the value of your property, and then on the AAHOA side, it's like, you wouldn't have shit if it wasn't for us, because we have 60% of all the hotels in the country. So try doing this with somebody else and see how it goes.
Right.
Because they're a part of the institution. Is that the dialogue that you're hearing and that's taking place? Or tell me a little bit about that.
And you mean as far as transferability, or as far as just negotiating franchise?
Yeah, like, I guess, like, just these competing interests of the owners and the franchisors, and like that dialogue that they have, where, I guess each party could really dig their heels in and say, well, if you don't have nothing, if it's not for me, and they say, okay, well, neither do you.
Right.
That's what I always, that's what comes to my mind when I
Mhm.
think about this stuff. And I don't know if that's what reality is in your world that you're dealing with.
Well, and I think there's definitely an element of that. I mean, and again, it just depends on the circumstances. And both parties, of course, have to analyze where they're at in the mix. I mean, usually, and you have this with all negotiations, and I've seen it repeatedly, especially in my background and training as an attorney, you have to kind of evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of each of the parties under those circumstances. And what I mean by that is maybe there's a particular geographic location, and this brand is desperate to get one of their hotels in that area. Well, of course, they're going to be much more open to negotiating terms that maybe they wouldn't be as favorable with, a potential hotel owner in another part of the country that they already have adequate representation there with their flags. So it just, again, it depends, but I think that there's a little bit of all of that. And the beautiful thing is that as long as both parties are recognizing the value that the other brings to the table, it makes it go much smoother. It's typically when one side or the other digs their heels in, but then they also know that then the deal could fall apart. And and of course we've heard all the tips on negotiation. The party that's less emotional, the party that's able to walk away, has more control. So I think, of course, there's even that being played out,
That's interesting.
right?
Yeah.
So, but it depends again on the circumstances. I think for the most part, the brands clearly recognize the value of AAHOA and our members, and vice versa. Our there's always this idea, maybe from the brands, that if this AAHOA member doesn't sign with me, I'm sure I can find others, because AAHOA members tend to be very bullish on the hotel industry. It doesn't matter if there are headwinds of a big recession coming, or there are dire warnings of the future of the economy. Our members tend to look for the long term. They know that most of these agreements are 20-year franchise agreements.
Right.
So they're looking for the long term, and for the most part, they've done well in the hotel industry. They're bullish on the industry. And so, most of the brands know that if one won't sign, there's probably another one that will. And then vice versa, for the members too. They know that they have a selection of different brands, but maybe they have a better relationship with one versus the other, or they could always go independent. So they have those options. But in the end, they usually maybe have a family dream to own a certain brand, or maybe they've evaluated where the location of their real estate is, and they have a good sense that this particular brand, this particular flag will really attract guests and the traveling public in this area. So it's like anything. It all depends on kind of the nature of the circumstances, as to who has the upper hand in any negotiation. But that again goes back to our 12 points. We want to make sure the members are educated about these points so that there are no surprises, and they know if they have the strength in the negotiation, then they can negotiate those that are most important to them in a way that's most favorable to their circumstances.
And very, very well said. One of the points that really stuck out to me the most was the impact encroachment and cross brand protection. And I would imagine that's one of the biggest hot button issues with owners. I'm just thinking, if I opened up a hotel and a year later I got a letter in the mail saying that somebody was opening up a hotel of the same brand but just a different sub brand that's almost indistinguishable to the common consumer, right across the street, I would be fearful, especially when the brand's value, one of the main points of their value is the loyalty programs, and now you're fighting for the same pool of guests. So that one to me is huge, as I could imagine. Is that one of the biggest hot buttons for the members, in your opinion?
Yes, it is. And it's one too that they can negotiate, because What you're talking about, of course, is the area protection. And generally, the way I like to look at that is if you have a hotel in a certain area, this would give you a circle around your hotel. And maybe it's, a circle that's only 3 blocks, or maybe it's a circle that's 3 miles. But the idea is that then the brand cannot come and authorize the same brand to be in your circle, because the idea is always that our hotel owner members, they know that they are in competition with other hotels, but they don't want to be in competition with their own brand. I mean, they're flying that flag, operating that hotel. They don't want to be in competition with their own brand. So that is the idea, that it would protect them. One of the issues that you may have noticed in the 12 points that we have been trying to highlight as well is usually the brands will agree that they will not put another same brand hotel in that circle. But yet in today's world, so many of these brands have other flags, other hotels that are so similar to that brand that yet, there's not really a protection. In other words, if I'm putting my hotel up, and then you're authorizing as a brand to put another hotel that, even though it's a different brand name, it's so similar to mine, it's attracting the same mid-level guests. It also has a small pool. It also looks the same. It also has, all of the same amenities. And when they are going to the central reservation website for that brand, that same hotel pops up right across the street from me. So we're also kind of trying to push this concept that if it's the same or similar quality, similar market, that should also be kept out of that area of protection. So again, you are not competing with your own brand. You're only competing with others, that have different brand names from your hotel.
Yeah, and I totally see that. And then on the flip side, I think like about these hotel developments that exist where there's minimum 2, if not 3, 4, or 5, almost in like a compound, where they're similar brands, of the same parent brand, and then maybe a couple outliers depending on how many hotels are there, where I'm sure they would argue that the performance is performing better than single hotels in an area of protection,
Right.
because they've almost created this like demand within an oasis that they built. But to me, you'd have to own it all, and control the rate, or it'll never work.
And again, as we said, these are designed to be educational points that a member then, when they go and sit down with this brand, they can say, hey, I'd love a 3-mile circle around an area protection, 3-mile circle around my hotel. And not only do I not want the same brand, but you have these other 3 brands that are so similar that I want that included in my circle. Maybe they get the answer they want. Maybe maybe it's a straight no. But
it is negotiable.
But it's negotiable.
All of these points are negotiable.
Well, yes and no. Only to the extent that some of these points, it's made clear by the brands they will not negotiate them.
What's one of those points that is basically non-negotiable?
Right.
But you still felt like it should be on here,
right?
Despite that.
Yes, and I'll give you the example of the very first point, and that's on liquidated damages. And that's an interesting one, because the concept here is if there's an early termination. So like I said, most of these agreements are running 20-year franchise agreements. So you sign a contract that you are going to maintain that hotel, flying that flag, maintaining the brand standards for 20 years. Well, we all know things can happen in 20 years. And if there's an early termination, what the franchise agreement says is that it would be too difficult to go to court to determine the damages for the franchise brand. So instead, they have what are called liquidated damages. And most of these liquidated damages, it's pretty standard in the industry that if you have to terminate early, you're going to pay your royalty fees, your average of your royalty fees, for a minimum of 3 years. Some of them say 5 years. Okay.
That's rough.
So exactly, it's very rough. That means if you have to terminate early, you're looking at usually paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in liquidated damages. So it's not so easy to change your mind. And most of the franchisors absolutely will not negotiate that up front. Now, the good news is, and we have seen it from time to time, especially if a hotel owner is really struggling. Maybe that brand just doesn't work in that geographic location. Maybe there's other factors. Maybe, from a personal perspective, the hotel owner or his family, really were struggling with some other issues, had some other high expenses. But bottom line is, if they really see that they're struggling and this is not a good fit, sometimes then at the point of termination, the brands will consider negotiating and lowering those liquidated damages.
But not during the initial contract.
But
It's
not
basically on a case by case
right,
basis.
exactly.
So this is an educational platform of saying, like, hey, just so you know, this exists and this is what you're in for if you think that there's any instability in that. And then additionally, to say that if it does happen, maybe you can get away with it when the time comes and get something negotiated, but certainly not at the point of contract.
Yes.
So out of the 12 points, you know, a lot of brands you said have been, very supportive of this. And a lot of this, what I'm getting is basically just capitalism. Like, hey, this is our interest as owners. The brands will either agree or disagree to go with it. And, you just have to weigh your cost benefit analysis as an individual or as an ownership group and decide what you want to do. And same with the franchisor, and decide, is this somebody that we see will be more value than just this one contract to us, and how we can make that work. But one brand, particularly Marriott, has been on the it's been on the news, at least the hotel news, that they've basically said we're formally disengaging with AAHOA because we do not align with the 12 points of fair franchising, and we can't be associated with an organization formally that doesn't have the same values as we do. So I'm just curious to know, I mean, again, these 12 points have at least been flushed out since you were involved back in 2005 to 2014, within that range. So what changed? Like, what was the big impetus for this falling out, I would suppose?
Right. Well, and let me explain that that while Marriott did mention the 12 points of fair franchising, we really believe it was more in connection with some proposed legislation that was suddenly introduced. Well, I shouldn't say suddenly. It was actually introduced in New Jersey a couple years ago. And AAHOA, we did not author this bill. There's an assembly member in New Jersey named Raj Mukherjee, and he knows several of our members in New Jersey, and is very connected with the hotel industry, and had heard some of the concerns, some of the complaints over the years of unfair practices in the industry, and introduced this bill in New Jersey that that actually addresses some of these issues that are in the AAHOA 12 points. of fair franchising. So it was actually, I started in this role as President CEO on May 16 of 2022. So last year, May 16. And 4 days before that, there was actually a hearing on this bill in New Jersey. And I talked to the officers and I said, this is something that it is worthy of our time and effort to support this because it really does address a lot of the fair franchising issues that we have been talking about for so many years. So I was able to fly out to New Jersey. Our members showed out in force and we testified. They gave story after story of some of the unfair practices that they've been challenged with. And the bill passed out of the first committee at the assembly level. And so that's really when we started seeing pushback from many of the brands, including Marriott, that they were concerned about this legislation, concerned about AAHOA's support for the legislation, and said if AAHOA is going to take this tactic, then we are going to disengage from supporting AAHOA. So needless to say, we've reached out to them numerous times. We have, had many conversations. The Marriott leadership has said repeatedly that actually between Marriott and AAHOA, we have more in common than in conflict. But at the same time, they did not feel they could support AAHOA as long as we continued to support this legislation in New Jersey. So we've kind of even thrown it out there. Well, can't we professionally agree to disagree? And they have taken more the position that no, as long as you're supporting any aspect of this legislation, we feel that as Marriott, we cannot continue to be involved with AAHOA. So it's kind of put us between a rock and a hard place because, of course, our members, we're here to represent our members. Our members are strongly supporting this New Jersey legislation. And in fact, the AAHOA Board of Directors unanimously voted to support 4 key principles in this New Jersey legislation. So, our hands in some ways are tied, although we're very disappointed that Marriott's not joining with us and not willing to, kind of help us, work through this. So,
but this is the legislation. 4 of the points went through. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. So,
well, congratulations.
Well, thank you. Now it passed. So let me explain. I want to make sure that I'm clear on this. So it's a bill that's been introduced both on the Assembly side in New Jersey and the Senate. They were identical bills on both the Assembly and then the Senate. On the Assembly side, there were 2 committees that had to hear it before it could move forward. So far, both committees on the Assembly side have heard it and have approved it. The second committee just approved it with some amendments that we were aware of, that we supported because we were listening again to the brands, the opposition, their concerns. And so we approved and supported these amendments. And now coming out of those amendments are these 4 principles that we've been pushing for from the beginning. So it's passed out of 2 committees. The next step is the Assembly itself, and then moving forward on the Senate. So it still has a ways to go before it would become law, but it is getting strong support in New Jersey among the legislators in New Jersey.
And that's a tangible win for AAHOA. Even, despite what happens moving forward, which it sounds like it has a pretty good shot, but even then, just to get this far with it surely is a win. And an even further bolstering, at least the principle of the 12 points of fair franchising, what it stands for and what its purpose is. So we are over the hour mark. We're out of time, but I want to give you the last word here as we wrap up our show today. And basically just give you one last opportunity to basically advocate for AAHOA, 12 points of fair franchising, or, to speak on anything else you wanted to get out there to the world today.
Yes, and thank you. Thank you for that. So I should clarify that with the New Jersey legislation as well, there are 4 principles. And these 4 principles align with some of our 12 points. And that's why we're continuing to support them. But the 4 principles that we stand for that are very important to us is that, one, if a brand is mandating that its hotel owners purchase goods and services, products and services from a particular vendor, or maybe it's only 2 or 3 vendors, that there should be competitive pricing for that. In other words, if you're mandating that all your hotel owners have to purchase goods and services from these particular vendors, the prices should not be higher because there should be discounted pricing. There should be, kind of a benefit from so many hotel owners buying these products and services. And unfortunately, what we're hearing from a lot of our members is that, at least with respect to some brands, they're actually paying double, sometimes triple the price if they bought those exact same products from that same vendor. But because
we know where the money's going.
Right, exactly.
Let's just call it what it is. We know where you got to charge triple if you've got money going out the other way.
Exactly.
For those of you who are listening who aren't following that, because the brands typically have negotiated with these vendors, hey, we're going to mandate that our owners buy from you. So if we do that, you're going to give us a kickback. And so it's
yes.
From an entrepreneurial standpoint, as a hotel owner, it's backwards, because if they were doing this independently, they would be negotiating that completely opposite of what the brand would be doing. It's just it's like antithetical to common business practice. But that's the dichotomy when you're an entrepreneur and then you have a publicly traded company brand also in the mix as well.
Yes.
So yes, that's one of the 4 things.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt you. I wanted to emphasize that.
Right. So, and then you raised actually the second principle that we stand for, and that this bill clearly spells out, is that to the extent that the brands are receiving money from these vendors, because as you said, the word kickback was actually in the original bill. It's been amended. Now it says fees, commissions, rebates, consideration. But to the extent that the brands are receiving sometimes tens of millions of dollars of money from these vendors, that now they would have to disclose it. They'd have to identify who they're getting the money from, how much they're receiving, and return it to the franchisees for the betterment of the system. And so we were able to kind of look at what brands had done in the past. And we saw 10 years ago, for example, one brand did that. They were receiving a little bit of money from the vendors, and they were using it to buy hardware and software for their hotel owners. And now it's just, like I said, tens of millions of dollars that we are seeing are going to the brands from these vendors, and they're keeping it, they're pocketing it. And, as a result, the hotel owners are paying higher prices, and it's all their money that then is being used. So that's the second principle. The third is that there should be no new fees that are implemented or suddenly included in the fee statement for a hotel owner that were not disclosed prior to when they signed their original franchise agreement, unless either the hotel owner has approved it or one of the FACs, which is a franchise advisory council. And those are usually kind of appointed or elected hotel owners that are appointed to represent the rest, because there's so many thousands of them, unless somebody has approved it. So in other words, a brand can't just start unilaterally adding high fees without the franchisees and the hotel owners having a say in it. And
And
then,
as we know, a lot can happen over 20 years,
right,
right? So that's kind of where this falls into play. If
correct.
you're on year 16 and then they say, well, life's changed and we need this additional fee now because something is that wasn't relevant back then is now a factor today. That's kind of where that provision comes into play.
Exactly.
But
And
before there was no protection, it was basically do this or we're going to, I guess, sue you for not paying us, I suppose.
correct.
Okay.
And the point is too, because I mean, going back to, we had talked about a little bit about Best Western and how the members themselves make the decisions. The hotel owners themselves make the decisions. And oftentimes the hotel owners will approve fees because, as you said, the years pass and things change. And maybe you're using the example of cybersecurity, right? That has become a big issue in today's world, and a lot of hotels are being attacked. So maybe there has to be additional fees for additional cybersecurity systems and protections. But then the members, the hotel owners, should have a say in that. It shouldn't just be, we're not going to tack on another, $500 fee every 3 months without you at least knowing what we're doing and having a say in it. So it's again kind of focusing on the fairness and the partnership where they're both in this together. And then the fourth principle is actually on the loyalty program. Now, we as traveling members of the public, we love our loyalty program, right? You stay in a hotel for 9 nights and you get your 10th night for free. And our members recognize that, they recognize the value of that. But what we have discovered is that the brands now are starting to sell their loyalty points at a discount. And so, say for example, you want to go and stay at a Marriott, and maybe the room night in New York City is $750 a night or 50,000 points. Well, you can go online and buy 50,000 points for just a fraction of that room cost. And there's like travel hacks and YouTube videos on how to do this. Well, but you think about it then from the hotel owner's perspective. If I own the hotel and you were coming to my hotel and paying me $750 a night, or now suddenly you're coming to my hotel and you're not paying me anything, and the brand is taking all that money, and typically they will only give the hotel owner maybe 25 to 30% of whatever that rate is.
Right.
So instead of $750, maybe now I'm only getting $100. Or if it's $100 room night, instead of getting that $100 of a room night, now suddenly I'm only getting $20 or $25. And so what this bill says is it would not stop the franchisors or the brands from doing this, but it would require them to then reasonably compensate the hotel owners. In other words, either pay them their lowest advertised room rate for that night or the value of the points that were just sold, so that the guests can still take advantage of their points. They still have the loyalty program, but the hotel owners then are at least being reasonably compensated for these guest room nights, and the brands are not, taking all of the profit from doing this through the loyalty program discounted fees.
Well, I think that's great. Certainly great to highlight. So thank you for doing that. And I hope that for everybody listening, if you're working at the front desk of a hotel and a guest is checking in with points, like to hear this and now be able to have a different level of relatability to like the impact of that reservation on the owners and on the business. And with a lot of this stuff too, hopefully we can all, as non-owners listening, take away something that we can apply to our daily jobs here in the hotel business and learn how it affects our owners and our business. So I appreciate you, Laura Lee, for coming on and giving our listeners the opportunity to think about the way they do their jobs differently, and to educate us all about AAHOA, the 12 points. And sounds like you guys are doing great things.
Thank you.
I may be going to the conference next week. I still don't even know if I'm going. We'll see. So maybe I'll see you there.
Well, we would love to have you, and I've directed, especially since it's my first one in this role, I've directed the team to make sure it is spectacular. And while things are all coming together, I think we're going to be able to deliver that. So I hope you're able to join. And of course, any of your audience, would love to have them come and check it out, because it's there's no place like AAHOA, and our conventions are really really over the top. So would love to have you join.
Yeah, the parties are awesome, by the
Yeah.
way. That's another thing. It's not even just a convention, it's just
Right.
awesome parties, awesome fun, great food.
Yeah.
So AAHOA Con, April 10th through the 14th.
It's actually
Or the
April
11th.
April 11 through 14, and it's in Los Angeles at the Los Angeles Convention Center. But our welcome reception on April 11 is actually at the LA Coliseum, which is historic this year, 100-year history at the LA Coliseum. So that's our welcome reception, and we will have fireworks and a drone show, and so it will be great fun.
Yep. AAHOA does not go cheap out on the conferences. Doesn't, it's a great experience for everybody going. So thank you for putting that on. Thanks for, the open invitation to our listeners, and Laura Lee, thanks for your contributions to the business and for representing all of our owners. Appreciate you being on the show today.
Yes, well, thank you. It was quite an honor, so appreciate it.